This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Time for school.
In just a few moments, you're going to hear from my new friend Kurt Madden out of San Diego, California. He's got an amazing background in education, one of those being CEO of Motivated Youth Academy, which we'll, of course, dive into on today's episode. This guy could also smoke me in a triathlon. The guy is an amazing athlete as well. I know you're going to enjoy this next episode, so please stay tuned for this next episode of the School Success Podcast. Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new friend out of the beautiful state and city of San Diego, California, Kurt Madden, who is into a lot of different things and is very good at all of them. But a couple of those I'll mention as I introduce him. He is the CEO of KM Educational Consulting, which we'll dive into, as well as the CEO of Motivated Youth Academy. He's been in education for a very, very long time, a dedicated man into fitness as well. Just finished an Ironman a few weeks ago in Hawaii. So he's into a lot of things. The guy could run circles around me, no problemo. But I don't want to take any thunder away from him. I'll pass it off to Kurt to introduce himself. So Kurt, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Oh, welcome, Mitchell. It's great to be here with you today.
It's going to be awesome, man. Well, I always like to start with, you live in San Diego. I've been there, a couple times and I loved it. What do you like to do for fun in San Diego? If I was to come visit, you'd be like, hey, Mitchell, you got to do this when you come to San Diego.
Sure. I think when I reflect on all the places I've lived in the world, that San Diego really offers, I think, a premier climate. Again, it's very evident that I'm into fitness, the outdoors, and San Diego is very, very unique. The county is the size of Rhode Island. So Mitchell, if you came in, this is how we would start the day. We would take a quick dip in the ocean. We'd go for a run. We'd head out to the mountains. We'd experience snow. We'd drop down to the desert, get a little heat, and then we'd head down to Mexico. We'd cross that line and we'd have a couple fish tacos. And then to wrap it up, we would go ahead and jog down the beach and finish the day with that sunset. So all in one day in our beautiful city.
Man, okay. I actually didn't know the snow is that close to San Diego. So how close is it to get to snow?
In the wintertime, you'd have to travel about 30 to 35 miles. Our highest mountain, I wouldn't even call it a mountain. It's more of a hill. It's about 6,000 feet.
Man, and there's like is there a ski resort up there that you can have a
No, there is not. The closest ski resort is actually about 135 miles in a place called Big Bear, California. But what is so nice is I can bike near this terrible place called Torrey Pines, which you probably heard about, great golf course. I can see Catalina to my left. And on a clear day, I can see 135 miles up to Big Bear and see snow on the mountaintops.
Man, that's awesome. And I will say, I do really like California. Their climate is amazing. My wife and I did a road trip last year from Florida all the way to Alaska and spent 10 days of that RV road trip in California and loved it. I would say our favorite place, though, I love San Diego. Our favorite place was San Luis Obispo. Is like, holy smokes, the downtown was the most cute downtown. I was like, all right, we could live here. Like, this is good. Because what I like about California, again, like you just mentioned, it has desert, it has winter, it has all that snow and stuff. But I love the mountains and rocks into the ocean and the rolling hills of green. Like, that is just the most beautiful sight. And so, yeah, California's kind of got it all, which is pretty cool. And it's such a difference from Southern California to Northern California. We went through like Wairika, California. It was like, this is so different, but we loved it. Well, let's dive into your background in education before we dive into kind of currently what you're doing. And if it naturally progresses into that, totally fine. But kind of give us a little bit of background on what Kurt's been doing his whole life.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I think that, I was maybe fortunate at the time. I thought I was unfortunate. I grew up inner city. So I grew up in an inner city environment. I was literally from a dysfunctional home. Between my mom and dad, there were 9 marriages. I ran away at 14. I ran away again at 17. I was still in high school. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. From there, I went to a community college for 2 years to get my associate degree. From there, I went to San Diego State to get my bachelor's degree. Then I earned my master's degree in physical education with the master's in exercise physiology. And then I had really, I think the people that influenced me, my greatest teachers, there was a calling there. It's like, I need to stay in this business for the rest of my life. And I started coaching swimming at the age of 17. Before I knew it, I was at a community college working part-time. I was a professional triathlete for about 5 years. And then my wife had a serious talk with me, who was already in education, to say, your contract is up and we're going to have children now. So you need to settle down and you need to really commit. So I really transitioned from a physical educator to a science teacher, to an assistant principal, to a principal at an inner city school. And then I went to the most premier high school in San Diego. From there, I transitioned to be a superintendent up in Big Bear Lake, California. Great ski resort, about 2,500 kids. I worked there for 5 years. And then I transitioned down to Los Angeles and I worked for a small district there for about a year as a superintendent. And then I really definitely pivoted over to charter schools, where I served as a principal for a year. And then all of a sudden, I'm a CEO of 5 different nonprofits. And we're serving kids throughout the state of California. And then about a year ago, I transitioned to be a board consultant. So I think that the lifelong learning, the students, me, is really in my DNA. And I think through my travels, I've had great mentors. I've had great people in my network that have inspired me to say, come in with confidence, but taper it and temper it with humility. Be a lifelong learner. And it's so nice in this day and age that all the students and people that I've worked with social media, it's nice to see that I can loop back in with them, and also be grateful and thankful for the people that have made me a better person.
Man, what a background in education. And I love your story from how you started with your family background to get to where you are today. So that is excellent. And what a thing for your kids to see as well, your story. So I love that. And obviously all the kids that you've been over and how you've taught them and been over them in education. So I love that. Let's dive into what you're currently into. So you mentioned CEO of the 5 nonprofits. Is that still current, or are those kind of in the past and you're just doing a couple things now?
Yeah, I've kind of transitioned. I think I'm at the point that it's nice to build capacity within the organization and I can bring on new people. So I pivoted from being a CEO of 5 different nonprofits down to Motivated Youth Academy. At the same time, I think there's a certain skill set when you work with 5 different nonprofit board of directors. So typically in a school district, a superintendent will work with a board of, say, a consistency of 5 people. I've had the luxury of developing relationships with 5 different boards. So really the total number that I work with as far as board members, about 14. And over the past 5 years, we've had continuity, we've had success, we've had integrity, we've built capacity, we've served thousands of kids, but I know it's time for me to now transition. So really what I do, I'm an executive coach. So I work with our executive directors who are going to step into that position to be a superintendent, to work a lot on board governance, to work on leadership, to really make sure they have a full understanding of all aspects of the organization. But at the end of the day, it's really that moral imperative to share my passion about student learning, to share, what we always need to do no matter what. I think since COVID, our organization has done very well because, again, we are mostly online or we're working in an independent study environment. So we've been able to pivot. We've been able to adapt. I tell people the beauty of our organization, and I'm from a typical brick and mortar, and I think that was a challenge during COVID. It was hard for them to pivot because typically we've done it for 150 years one way. And I'm not saying it's bad, but all of a sudden COVID came around and it's like, oh my gosh. So I tell people, I think the reason we've been so successful with our students, social emotional learning, retention of staff, is that like we're the Airbnb, Amazon Prime, and we're the Lyft all combined in one. We have very, very low overhead. We're very lean at the same time. We really maintain a real high level of integrity with our curriculum. We keep our professional development front and foremost. And I always preach and teach and try to model. I want my leaders growing faster than the children. And in doing that, they model that. And I think when they model that, it's like, children are like, oh my goodness, so you don't really have all the answers all the time. Oh no, But that's great. That's a great sign. But to engage and collaborate, and I think it brings us joy, and I think it gives you a lot of drive and ambition. I would also say too, is just, when you empower people, if it's children or adults, to say, how can we get there? Ask those open-ended questions versus it's kind of a top-down approach. It's amazing how that intrinsic motivation really, really increases. And I think in wrapping up your question, I know that was a little bit long, my response, but in this day and age, what I've learned, Mitchell, time and time and time again, is that people don't want a boss anymore. They want a coach.
Man, and I can see that you love what you're doing. So I don't know, is Kurt ever going to retire? Or is Kurt going to do this till the day he dies?
You can ask my wife. She's my coach after 42 years, and I think that I still have a lot to give. And I think again, that's the beauty of what we do. It keeps you young. It keeps you hungry. Learning is I'm so grateful as I've gotten older. I know a lot of people that I've lost along the way, or again with restrictions with health and things like that. And I think again for me, I'm gonna continue to do it until I can add value. And when I get to that point where I can't, I'm gonna ride into the sunset saying, hey, no regrets. It's been a beautiful ride.
Good. Well, I know we're going to dive into the both things we mentioned in the intro there, but let's dive into your consulting side, like what you do, what's kind of the day-to-day looks like in that. And then we're going to dive into the academy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first thing with my consulting is it's literally it's a labor of love. I know with social media and everything that I could literally work 7/24. But typically I would start my day early. I don't want people to be surprised, but when you're having your cup of coffee, Mitchell, at 7 a.m. in Florida, I'm up at 4. And I typically take my first hour. I really dedicate that to professional development. Here in my office, I've got about 8 different books that I tap into to really kind of get those synapses to fire and really say, what can I do to build my capacity and try to model that. And then from there, it's a transition into starting to go through my emails, look at my calendar, make sure I'm really dialed in. I want to make sure that, that if I look at the week that I'm scheduling to finish for any activity or project, that I'm really that Sherpa, that I'm coming alongside people, trying to make work light and not overburden them, but know that I'm there just in case. I mean, I'm really a text message away. Then I'll usually take a break for about an hour and a half or two. I'll get in a workout either in my fitness studio, or go for a swim, or go for a run, or do some strength training. And then I'm typically right back into various Zoom meetings throughout the day. So it could be a one-on-one meeting with our board president. It could be a call with 2 maybe executive directors that have similar issues. It could be with an authorizing school district superintendent. It could be with someone on a podcast. It could be something that in an area of finance or personnel or just about anything. It's pretty open-ended. I know with Zoom, there's advantages, but I think sometimes for me, it's the disadvantages. My wife she's retired, but she often reminds me, you can take a break now. You don't need to be on Zoom all day long. But I think, again, being that servant leader, I typically go right up to 5 o'clock, but our organization, we run hard, we run fast. I still want to make myself available because if there's a crisis, if someone needs to get my input or recommendation, I typically go to about 6:30 or 7 at night, and then it's family time, spend an hour or two with my wife and call it a day, and then continue. And then again, on the weekends, we just know in school and in consulting, anything might come up at any time. I try not to go dark for too long because I know if there's something that comes up on the weekend, I want to be available. So it's kind of keeping that flow. Every day is different. I know, for example, yesterday, you can appreciate this. My day started at 3:07 a.m. in San Diego. I spent 4 hours to prepare for 3 different board meetings. We went on camera live at 8 a.m. and I was done, Mitchell, at 3:30 p.m. You can do the math on that. You're on Zoom for about 12 and a half hours. And I knew for sure I was just toast. So I had a quick session with my acupuncturist. She got me back on track. That went about 45 minutes. Came back home, had a great dinner with my wife, good dialogue. We watched a quick movie and got in the jacuzzi, and it was a wrap at 9 p.m.
And for your consulting, you serve specifically just in education, or do you guys serve into the business sector as well?
Yeah, for right now, it works really well in education because that's really my niche, and it varies with people throughout the state, throughout the nation. And also, I serve as a triathlete coach, and I've learned that becomes almost like a life coach. And I I didn't realize 10 years ago that I'm just going to fall right into this. But as I work with various clients throughout the nation and really throughout the world, what they give back to me, and I've got people that are older than me, younger than me, some are about my age. They say there's two things that they enjoy. Number one is the accountability. And that warms my heart. They said, I need someone to keep me accountable. But secondly, is it's teaching them to be consistent and really develop good habits. And I think if I can do that, it's really important for that feedback. But I need to take stock in myself to say, am I doing that every day and doing the very best I can, in all capacities.
Okay. And I know this is a school and education podcast, but if we took just a 30-second tip for triathlon, people are looking at, if I was to get into it, you're like, Mitchell, you need to do these 3 things or you're not going to be able to do it, or a tip or anything. What would you do? Real quick plug.
Well, I would say what our mindset is it's swim, bike, run, and have fun. And I think the thing that I've learned is that no matter where you are, never, never, never say I can't. Never, never, never say I won't. You should say I'm going to take that first step. And in Hawaii, I was moved at the awards ceremony with 500 people. The 2 oldest people in the race, Mitchell, that finished it, they weren't there to win it, but they did finish it. A 76-year-old woman and an 84-year-old man. They received a 5-minute standing ovation from people from Venezuela, Brazil, Japan, all over the US, Canada, ages 18 to 91 years old. And to be in that moment, to be in that arena, it was off the charts of all the things I've ever done. I can remember being on a trip in Liverpool where I was in the cavern where the Beatles actually played their music when they first started. And to be in that moment, that vibe of say, wow, those people were here. But to transition to say, that's a great example. What role models? I mean, if I can do that at 76 or 84, I'm going to be over the top. So it's never too late to get started. But again, every day is an opportunity.
Man, that's incredible. That stuff always blows my mind. I remember when again, this is a long time ago, when I was in high school, I ran that marathon I had mentioned to you. And I remember seeing people with shirts on it said, whatever it was, how they'd finished 50 marathons a marathon in each state. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I haven't even been to all 50 states and they've done a marathon in each one. So that's incredible. And the age thing, man, that's 84. I'm hoping I can do something like that when I'm 84, at least just run. I mean, goodness gracious. So, because there's a time limit, correct? You have to finish by a certain amount of time.
Yeah, there is a time limit. In the full Ironman, the cutoff is 17 hours. And they try to be respectful of that, because the first Ironman I did, it was in 1980. And unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have a cutoff. So the person that actually of 17 hours. So the person that finished last in that event was barely able to swim the 2.4 miles, barely able to finish the 112-mile bike, did the marathon, but along the way stopped in a Denny's coffee shop for 3 hours and drank coffee and ate pancakes, and then finished, I think, at 7 o'clock the next morning.
Dang, and it still counted technically?
Yeah, that was a true story, believe it or not. But that was at the infancy. That was the start before it turned into $1 billion or a business. Yeah, that was in the early days.
Man, I was gonna say I could totally finish an Ironman if there's no cutoff. Give me a year, I will get it done. Like I could sleep.
Okay. You've thrown that down now, Mitchell. We have people listening today. Okay, so you cannot back out.
Oh boy, I got to do it. I want to do it. At least a triathlon. So, but you have encouraged me with that, so thank you. I just wanted to get your tip on that. But let's jump into the academy now. I would love to hear a little bit about it, but also we'll jump into that first kind of question I typically ask guests. Just what are some of those challenges you guys are up against as the academy, and how are you also combating those?
Yeah, I think, Motivated Youth Academy, we're really no different than any school. And I think really what we try to start is start with our culture. I think I've learned in all my travels of great schools and being a principal and assistant principal and a science teacher and physical educator, the number one priority in any school to have success, I believe, is culture. And that really starts with a tone at the top, meaning that we really have to identify our core values. What are things that are going to keep us on the straight and narrow? It's kind of like a Zappos, mindset, with Tony Hsieh, the work that he did there. And I think, again, I really take a lot of stock in what we do in our core values, to really review them on a regular basis, to check for understanding, to make sure as we're onboarding new staff that they really are aligned to core values, because our biggest success will be when those core values aligned. At the same time, when things go sideways, we can usually go down that list and someone may be deviated from that. So I think that's the first thing that we need to do, is just ensure that we're all on the same page. Secondly, is again, we've got to kind of get into COVID, because in my network, I'm really humbled by everything that I hear, and trying to come up with solutions and answers. And I think that our students chronologically have gotten 2 years older. But I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind, I don't think there's anyone on this podcast who would say that didn't happen to us, is that we've got a big gap right now, and the maturation, the development, the social emotional learning. So what we try to do, even though we're an independent study, which means we're not a typical school with, say, 25 classrooms, and we're sitting down with 30 kids in classrooms and they're going throughout the day, that it's independent study. That means that you can work anytime, anywhere. Your teacher, literally though, the non-negotiable in our organization is that every single teacher checks in with every student every single day. That could be a text message, that could be a quick Zoom, that could be a phone call, that could be even an in-person. And I can say this honestly and sincerely. I want to be very transparent and yet professional. I've worked on high school campuses where I've had kids tell me at the end of the day, from when the time they got off the bus to the time they got back on the bus, no one ever said a word to them, which means that they can sit in a classroom with a backpack on, they can go hide at lunchtime, they don't have to say anything on the bus. And that saddens me, because that's not good. So we're trying to check in. And I really take this phrase literally, that I've learned that if we can get into the hearts of students, then we can start to get into their heads. So it's really taking stock on, how are you doing today? Do we have 30 seconds? Do we have 2 minutes? I did that when I was a classroom teacher. I'd say, no, we're going to go slower today. If I could check in with each of my students, I know the lesson was going to go a lot better. If I took note that, hey, something wasn't right, I needed to address that immediately. So when we look at building the capacity of our staff, we check our culture, we check our core values, we focus on that moral imperative, and we kick things off like that, achievement for all students. We take stock with each student. How's it going today? Did you have breakfast? Are you still homeless? Are your parents home? Did your brother maybe abuse you just with a little fisticuffs over the night? You just don't know. But then it's really kind of guiding that student to say, we've got to commit not to quit. We've got to engage every day, make that reasonable timeline. And again, there's a real delicate dance that you're supporting, but you're also keeping people accountable. And I look back, Mitchell, and probably just like you look back to your 2 or 3 greatest teachers. You know what they had? They had character. They weren't maybe the nicest person, but that wasn't their job. Their job was to get you to that finish line. So I know for our students, it's really being embracing that learning and their challenges. I think that over 75% of our students are that really socioeconomic disadvantage. We've got a mixture of diversity in our organization, from our students from African American to Native American and Hispanic. We have Caucasian, we have a wide variety, but they're the ones typically that didn't quite make it in a structured environment of 8 to say 3 in the afternoon. At the same time, we've had kids that already, their parents, they have children. We have one person that actually was on the USA Winter Olympics team, because for him, it would not have worked to go to a high school every day, because he was training all the time. How great is that? We had another student that had such a passion for soccer that he ended up on the Atlanta United Pro Soccer team, and he showed up at the high school graduation. So you can imagine, he's in a multi-year contract making tons of money. He comes back to the high school graduation to get his diploma. To me, that is a game changer. Not entitled, just with humility and things like that, but trying to really take that mindset that we're building the greatest leaders, for tomorrow. And then it's the collaboration, it's the continuous networking of staff to say, did you check in with student A? Did you check in with student B? Or, what, we need a guidance counselor. We've got some issue right there. What can we do proactively to make sure that we acknowledge life is not fair, life is tough, but at the end of the day, what can we put in their toolkit to adapt, to pivot, I find there's 3 things that if we can do it well. If we can establish hope in all individuals, especially students, hope is important for all of us. The engagement is the next part. How and why can we engage them? Really, really high levels of engagement. But the third thing, and I find probably the most important thing, is their self-worth. I find that people aren't successful in life, especially students. What they've lost is their self-worth. As soon as you can reestablish that as an educator in any role, you could be a bus driver, you could be, someone, a nurse, you could be a custodian, you could be a science teacher, principal, superintendent, you could be a volunteer, but establishing that self-worth. And I think in doing that, especially students who are disadvantaged, they're very, very street smart, and they can pick it up right away in any conversation or dialogue if you're real, if you're genuine. If you are, you know what? Good things are going to happen. Before you know it, you've got a best friend, and they're going to work harder than you could even imagine. And that's what brings us joy, is when students are doing that. So we're really pleased with our success rate as far as our graduates, the kids that are graduating, kids that are moving on to other opportunities in education and careers. And at the end of the day, there's never a finish line.
I love that. And just for those listening, so they're following correctly, you guys you're not a homeschool organization. It's a school that's just remote school, like COVID made every school be. You are that type of school that's just always remote. There's no physical building.
Exactly. So we call it non-classroom based. In a way, for some people, they literally can't handle that. They need that classroom, they need that parking space every day, they need the front office. But all of a sudden, when COVID happened, that changed everything. So for us, it could be anywhere from a Zoom one-on-one, it could be a group meeting, it could be some students are using their phone, it could be in a setting. We meet at a YMCA, do some tutorial with maybe 3 or 4 students. If we can get together on say a Friday at 10 o'clock, let's do a math in service, or let's do a math lesson. Maybe on Monday, we're going to go ahead and do a field trip, and we can do that. Maybe on a Tuesday, we're going to do a science lesson. And then again, you can mix and match that. And again, I think students, and what parents, I find this too, and I think COVID, it really came out very quick. What we discovered with COVID, I think, was number one, flexibility. People like flexibility. And I think, again, as we've kind of gone back to, things are open back up now, people want that flexibility. And I think it's difficult for large organizations to pivot like that, because in our organization, a student can really start off with a thing they enjoy best or they enjoy most. Maybe they're a musician. So from 8 to 9:30 every day, they can do music. And then all of a sudden they'll take a 30-minute break, and all of a sudden they'll get into math. If you're on a campus with 500 kids or 1,000 or 3,000, you can't, get on the loudspeaker every day and say, okay, everyone, we're here together. What do you want to do today? That'd be mass chaos, because you've got so many students. But we find that all of us, there's better times of the day when we learn. There's better times of the day when we focus. There's other times of the day when we're simply checking out. And that's the time when, again, with that flexibility that we have, that's fantastic. And again, with families, if you're traveling or there's an illness or something's going on, that's the beauty. In this day and age, it really, Mitchell, I never thought I'd say this, but you can learn anywhere. Back in the day, you had to go to school. You had to have that textbook. You had to sit in that row. You had to have the teacher with something called a chalkboard in front of you. In this day and age, it could be anything. The other thing, too, we found is students helping other students. There's something about an 11-year-old voice talking to another 11-year-old. So when you get that peer tutoring, and you know this as well as I do, when you have to teach a lesson or teach a concept, that's when you really know it for sure.
Yeah.
If you're doing direct instruction in a typical brick and mortar, sometimes that's really necessary. But we have to find out ways to say we need to kind of pivot it and shift it back to the learner, and have that teacher kind of be a coach or a facilitator and continue to do that, so the kids are working together on it.
So were you guys always, before COVID, already the same format you are? And so when COVID hit, literally you guys are like, we got this, and we just kept doing what you were doing?
Exactly. Yeah. Now we do have one, I don't want to contradict myself, but we do have one resource center on a Indian reservation, and it serves about 20 kids, but the majority of our students, they are working independent study or online in San Diego County and then the adjacent counties. So that's the point right there. We didn't really skip a beat when COVID hit. It was like, in a nice way, what we say, this is kind of how we roll. And we just do it. And I think, again, it was interesting because a lot of people that districts were sponsored by, they started to reach out to us and say, oh my gosh, can you guys help us out? How do we do this? But it's really, really hard. It's like you ride a bike one way and then you have to ride it the other way, or you throw something with your right hand, now you got to throw it with your left. And if I was a classroom teacher, especially in the lower grades, if I was working with kindergartners or first graders, and I've got 24 kids in a classroom, and they're very visual, they're very kinesthetic, they need to move all the time. Could you imagine that you're going to teach all day from a computer? That is really, really, really rough to do. I think the other thing too that we've found out is that in our organization, we typically save a lot of time, and that's what parents tell us. that if you look at a typical day on a campus, and I say this respectfully because I've been there before, students will get there at 8 and they'll leave at 3. We have something called, we have breaks in between classes, we have a nutrition break, we have a lunch break, and you start to build in all that extra time. And then in a lesson, a teacher can't talk for the entire 50 minutes. If they do, the kids are worn out, and so is the teacher. They go to the next class, that happens. So there's kind of a lot of dead time. When you're actually working independent study, you can compress out to about 4 hours a day. That frees children and that frees families up to do some other things versus, well, do we call the school and kind of get a get out early when he doesn't really have a dentist appointment, but we really would like to go and do something, so we'll do that. And I've been on that end, and it's just like, oh my gosh, and kids are leaving school left and right when you kind of know they don't really have. How does everyone have a doctor's appointment Friday at 9:00 in the morning? I don't think that's happening.
When COVID first hit, then did you guys get calls of and then just an influx of enrollment, or were you guys capped, or because you're online, you could take on as many people as you want? How did that kind of look?
Yeah, we did. We just got overwhelmed at first, and then all of a sudden, it was something that when we started looking at looking up in our capital, Sacramento, that the thing started slowing down so immediately. I think the legislators got together, and then they kind of put a freeze on enrollment, meaning that you can bring on more kids, but you're not going to get any more dollars. And then you're thinking, oh my goodness, we're kind of running a charity now. And then you're going to go upside down financially because you need more staff to serve more kids, but you're not getting the funding versus when things are somewhat normal, you're getting on the average about $10,000 per student. So we did that for a while, but then we had to hold that line to say, guy, that fund balance is starting to shrink a little bit. You don't mind helping out. It's just like anything in life at home. Guy, help the neighbor out. I'll help out, my kids or my nephew, but there goes a point where you've got to take care of yourself. So.
Man, I figured there's gonna be an influx of people going, oh, these guys figured it out already. So that is pretty sweet that you guys already had that model in place and we're already we're ready for this, we're prepared for this. So I love that. Obviously, there's still going to be some challenges. So we'll try to jump into a section. I'd love to hear, not challenges, jumping into stuff's that's going really, really good, which that already speaks for itself. You guys were already remote when COVID hit, but there's obviously some other things that are probably going super duper good. So giving you a chance to brag about your school and share some huge wins that hopefully some of the school leaders can take away as wins for themselves as well.
Yeah, and I want to make sure our listeners are really trying to maybe take a few nuggets from this podcast. And I would never profess that I know it all. I will profess that I will share with you what we've learned. I will share with you our failures. I'll share with you that I think it's important to share. That's the name of the game. It's like if you can develop a thought partner and get together, once a week with 3 of your thought partners and say, these are my successes, these are my failures, but let's talk about solutions. That's powerful. To me, that at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. But I think, again, I kind of reiterate what I see is that when you can make things very personalized, people really value that. It's like you've got your own personal coach as compared to this coach teaches 30 or 40 people the exact same thing, and then we'll just differentiate it. So it's that personalized learning that we can customize this. You can go at your own pace. I find that adults and children, when the pace is too fast, the number one thing they do is shut down. And it's nice to see people in our organization, especially our kiddos, to say the pace was just perfect. I wouldn't have made it when the pace goes really, really faster. And then again, you can accelerate them. So that personalized learning is number one. Number two, I think, again, make sure the integrity of the curriculum is top notch. So make sure that you've got your state content standards, make sure that it's approved by your universities, make sure that it's the most rigorous. But I find too, when you can do an online format, and then for some students, you still might need a textbook or two. I found with videos and things like that if they don't get it the first time, you tell them, hey, don't panic. You know what we're going to do? We're going to kind of watch that again, and we'll stop it, and then we'll go forward. We'll check for understanding. So in doing that, I think you're building that proficiency right there. I think the other thing, too, is that when you look at the course selection, the plethora of courses that our students can take and still meet the requirements for graduation are key. I've been on a high school campus, and I know you only can offer so many things at so many times. I think the other thing too is a variety of field trips that we can do, that anything is possible because we have the funds that can do that. And I think the other thing that I find, and again, I go back, it's kind of a compare and contrast. If I was on a high school with 2,000 students, there's only so many dollars, and you can't have everyone going on field trips all the time. That's just going to be impossible because you're limited by your transportation. But I think also what I find is we're really trying to connect them into a career sooner than later. And I think that's the number one thing that we talk about. I think all educators try to do that, but we look at our school success to say, we want them coming back a year or 2 or 3 from now, telling us about how our school impacted them. And I think that's really easy to do in our model because the teacher in our model, that's the one person that really has propelled them to get to that finish line. Sometimes, again, when you're working in larger systems and you're working maybe with, I would say, a typical middle school or high school teacher, they might see 150 students a day. That's a large number of touch points. Our model, it's not like that. You've got those 30 kids. And the other thing too is that in our model, many times we can have the same students for 2 or 3 years. And that's really, really nice that you're kind of looping versus some kids that get really attached to a teacher, and that's fine. But typically in any system, the next year they go to another teacher and another teacher. So they have 5 or 6 teachers a year. So it's having someone that really knows that student really well. And in doing that for 2 or 3 years, you can literally cut to the chase. So there's a lot of wins right there, I think. And again, it's always just trying to make sure that we're not top down. We have a very flat organization. So we like to lead from the middle and have things happen organically. So if we need to make any shifts with policies or curriculum or practices or things that we can do, it's a very open playbook. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a win-win for all.
Man. Well, you've been doing this a long time, Kurt. So as we wrap up our podcast today, I would love, and it could be more than one, but I'd love to hear some pieces of advice that you would share with other school leaders that are listening in. So I'll pass it off to you. Share any of those awesome, huge nuggets you got for that.
Yeah, it's something that I often think about is, what I can share. And I'm going to probably go back to what I said in the beginning. I think the number one thing for any school leader, any educator is build your capacity. Is that building your capacity is key and modeling lifelong learning. Secondly is really kind of assess or take stock on the culture of where you work. Whatever you can do to make sure that professional development is going to be front and foremost. Thirdly is continue to say, what can I do to inspire others to greatness? And I think sometimes I learned it's not the dollars that many times we tend to kind of use the phrase, we'll toss money, quote, end of quote, that we'll toss money at things. And many times money doesn't solve that problem. But I think, again, it's leading at the top and doing that and continuing to be, somewhat flexible to say that we're going to have to pivot. We're going to have to adapt. Bending rather than breaking, I think, is key. But at the end of the day, you're really honoring your mission, your vision, and what you're doing. And also take stock in yourself as an educator to say, how am I leaving my legacy? Am I really, truly making it better for other people? And I think at the end of the day, we say that education, I still think to this day, I say it, it's been said so many times, it's a very noble profession. But I think it's something that we know at the end of the day that it's what this country is built on. Quality education for all students, no matter what. And I think in doing that, we can feel as though that we've left our legacy, we've done good work. And again, just sharing best practices and sharing your failures. So don't feel like you're in this alone. I think in this day and age, anytime that you can share resources, get on LinkedIn, get on podcasts, tell your story, that's going to inspire others. Because I think at the end of the day, if we all could sit down together, our stories are very similar.
I love it. Thank you so much for giving up your time today to be on the podcast. I know you're a busy man, and I do love your story. And I want to thank you for all those years of education that you've been pushing and pouring into these students. I know it's a lasting impact and legacy. You've already done that for all those years. So thank you for doing that, and wishing you and your school nothing but the best as you guys continue to educate more students and pour into that next generation. And hopefully if I'm in San Diego sometime, we'll catch up. We'll do that dream day in San Diego. That would be awesome. Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Kurt for taking time and being on the podcast today. I loved our chat, and I love what he's doing at Motivated Youth Academy. And I love that he is staying active and fit through all of this with his triathlons that he's running. He inspired me to want to do that. I'm hoping he's also been able to inspire you too. And wherever you're at in this school journey that you're on, maybe you're at a point where you're trying to grow enrollments and figure out how to do better at what you guys are doing. I would love to hear from you. Hear where you guys are at, what you're working on. You can find us online at schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. We specifically work with schools to help them automate and streamline their application process to take a load off of the team and help you guys get some more enrollments and more applications in the door so that you don't have to do it all on your own. We also have a private Facebook group. I'd love you to connect with us in there. It's completely free and it's just for school leaders. It's called School Success Makers. And again, it's on Facebook. Private group just for school leaders called School Success Makers. I'd love to personally see you in there. We will be here next week with another amazing guest, as usual, on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.